58 Riot Tour, Vague 50. In plain words, you'd not live in our Napoli if you could live anywhere else. And that is why there are, to the square yard, more boys fresh from Nick and national refugee minorities and out-of-business whores than anywhere else I should expect in London town. The kids live in the streets. I mean, they have charge of them. You have to ask permission to get along them, even in a car. The teenage lot are mostly of the Ted variety. As captioned by Colin McInnes in Absolute Beginners, in the classic street photograph by Roger Main, taken in 1956, a gang of Teds loiter across Princedale Road in a slightly theatrical but nevertheless menacing manner. McInnes introduced Notting Hill as Little Napoli, the pop dystopia of his proto-mod photographer hero, the first teenager or the absolute beginner, our tour guide through the 1958 White Riot. As Britain emerged from post-war austerity, working-class youths found themselves no longer categorised as older children or young adults, but as a new economic class, the teenager. The first British manifestation, the Teddy Boy, evolved from the wartime black market spiv as a hybrid of upper-class Edwardian and Wild West styles. The Ted look consisted of a quiff with greaseback DA, duck's arse hairstyle, drape coat, bootlace tie, drainpipe trousers and brothel creeper or winkle picker shoes. George Melly summed up the Ted's revolt into style as an economic development from the spivs, in that they were not criminal in the old sense, they were not out for gain. On the whole though, they were profoundly antisocial, the dark van of pop culture, dedicated to the giggle and kicks. In the mid-50s, as youth culture was first defined in Hollywood by Marlon Brando in The Wild One and James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, over here, Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets caused a series of cinema riots and a rock and roll moral panic. As Portobello began its post-war transformation from rowdy flea market to international tourist attraction, the once respectable surrounding area acquired a rather seedy reputation. In the Notting Hill Interzone issue of International Times, the area is described as closed off and forgotten, grey, anonymous, all life and colour had vanished as quickly as the paint from the tenement walls, and Notting Hill sank into its own twilight of sensational crimes, violence, poverty, extortion and petty racketeering. As North Kensington hit an all-time low in 1953 with the notorious 10 Rillington Place murders, an article entitled Rotting Hill in the Kensington Post refuted allegations that Notting Hill is London's crime black spot #1 and is ridden with teenage gangs. Regardless of pop trends, Notting Dale was rocking anyway. The old slum area around Latimer Road Station had been in a riot waiting to happen state for some time. The Dale came into existence in the early 19th century as a shanty town inhabited by brickmakers and pig keepers, officially known as the Kensington Potteries, but soon nicknamed the Piggeries. The area's notoriety was established over 100 years before Absolute Beginners, when it was featured in Charles Dickens' Household Words journal as a plague spot scarcely equalled for insalubrity by any other in London. After a century of ineffectual do-gooding, Nottingdale still retained its rough reputation and was known as a police no-man's land where anything can happen and usually does. Anthony Richardson sets the scene in Nick of Notting Hill as the real-life Dixon of Dock Green, PC Nick Nixon, began his mid-50s beat. With its drab and furtive streets and its lines of squat grey buildings similar to miners' cottages, verging like so many London districts onto neighbouring areas of decorative and elegant buildings. This strange and sinister district was a world of its own, ferocious and futile at the same time, yet always beneath its grey secretive surface a delayed action missile which might explode at any moment. It seemed that on every street corner brawls and quarrels were taking place. Here a group of white youngsters would be lounging against a wall, jibing at coloured men passing by and wolf-whistling girls. Not infrequently, half a dozen men and lads were milling around one another, sparring for an opening. In answer to the question, "If you're so cute, kiddo, why do you live in such an area?" the absolute beginner explained that firstly it was cheap, but the real reason, as I expect you'll have already guessed, is that however horrible the area is, you're free there. No one, I repeat it, no one has ever asked me there what I am or what I do or where I come from. If you go in anywhere, they take it for granted that you know the scene. If you don't, it's true, they throw you out in pieces. The advent of the teenager coincided not very happily with the arrival of the first major wave of West Indian immigrants in Britain to ease the post-war labour shortage. In a mid-50s housing survey of London landlords, 90% admitted that they wouldn't take black lodgers, and some were openly prejudiced, displaying the notorious flat to let notices amended with no blacks, no coloureds or Europeans only.
You've got rooms going.
I have got a room, but I'm afraid I can't let you in.
Beg your pardon?
I can't let you in. I've got 14 English boys in here.
14 English boys. So you don't want
I can't mix. I'm ever so sorry, I wouldn't sell, but if I let you come in, all my boys would leave.
You mean let me come in?
If I let you come in, all the other ones would go.
Yes. Okay,
Ever so sorry.
yeah.
But it wasn't long before some enterprising landlords took it upon themselves to cater for the new black housing market. As more and more Afro-Caribbean people found accommodation in Notting Hill, the practice of charging extra for friends to stay with tenants escalated into rooms being split into sections, with people sleeping in shifts, Victorian slum style. The most notorious landlord to exploit the situation, Peter, originally Perek Rackman, was himself a post-war Polish immigrant. In the early 50s, Rackman set up a letting agency at 91-3 Westbourne Grove as a respectable front and began renting flats to sublet to prostitutes. In 1955, he came into a batch of properties in the Colville estate, which had already been sublet and then sublet some more. By then, Rackman was known to be operating the practice of putting the Schwarzers into distat, that is, encourage white-sitting tenants to vacate properties, then subdividing rooms and charging the new West Indian tenants more rent. In most first-hand accounts, he wasn't the worst, but he would become so notorious for the practice, due to events far from housing, that his name is now synonymous with slum landlord exploitation.
When we come back in the night, we see everything upside. All the floor mash up. All the wardrobe, all the chair, all the table. Pull up all the light. No water. I say, well.
By 1958, around 7,000 black people had settled in Notting Hill, and the Powys and Colville area was nicknamed Brown Town, as opposed to White City, the other side of the racial front line, Nottingdale. By then it seems that Rackman had managed to extricate himself from his slum empire as he moved on to property development, and in most accounts it was then that things really fell apart as his former henchmen tried to wring a profit from the deteriorating slums. With most local pubs unwelcoming to anyone regardless of race who wasn't a local, West Indian hustlers created their own scene, consisting of various types of clubs. There are after-hours or afters drinking clubs, basement or cellar clubs for daytime gambling, and the most famous, blues, dances, clubs or parties, an attempt to recreate backyard sound system culture indoors, named in honour of the Blaupunkt radio gramophone, the sound system prototype known as the Blue Point or Blue Spot, rather than blues music. Blues dance music went from jazz, calypso and Jamaican rhythm and blues through ska and rocksteady to 70s dub reggae. Like Irish shebeens, as West Indian clubs were also known, and the original and most violent mushroom clubs, or bottle parties of the indigenous English villains, blues could crop up anywhere, but tended to be in the Rackman areas around Powis Square and St Stephen's Gardens, thus defining the original West Indian Grove area as more Westbourne than Ladbroke. The story of the blues began in the basement of Fullerton the Tailors on Talbot Road, where Duke Vin was the selector. Then Bargy opened a cafe and cellar club next door, which became Roy Stewart's celebrated Globe after-hours bar-restaurant. On Powis Square, the basement Rackman flat of Michael de Freitas boasted a residency by the jazz pianist Wilfred Woodley, and the exclusive Montparnasse Club was further along Talbot Road. To the south, Colville Terrace hosted Sheriff's Club Stroke Gym and the Barbadians Club. To the north, Westbourne Park Road featured Larry Ford's Fiesta One on the corner of Ledbury Road and the Calypso Club near St Stephen's Gardens.
Blues clubs are now recognised as a vital ingredient in British pop culture that, into the bargain, helped transform Notting Hill from a dreary slum into the heart of multicultural London. However, at the time, they were not held in very high esteem. After the first riot incidents stemmed from noise complaints about them, the clubs played an integral part in the Profumo affair and the emerging drugs counterculture, whilst also encouraging the formation of the first tenants associations in Colville and St Stephen's Gardens.
Although the Richard Curtis Notting Hill film managed to avoid any reference to local history, the Hugh Grant walk along Portobello Road inadvertently features the main flashpoint of the 1958 Notting Hill race riots. 9 Blenheim Crescent, between the Samuel Beckett mural and the real travel bookshop, is the site of the 50s Caribbean cafe Toto Bags. Also known not always metaphorically as the Fortress, the cafe acted as a community centre and information service for newcomers, a gambling den to such early sound system selectors as Baron Baker, Count Suckle, Duke Vin and King Dick, a slumming attraction stroke cool hangout to some real aristocrats, Sarah Churchill, Winston's favourite actress daughter, Georgie Fame and Colin McInnes, and as a target for white rioters. Now a nondescript market store in the heart of gentrified Notting Hill, the house looks like it's preserved in its 50s condition as a memorial.
The incident usually cited as the one that started the 1958 Notting Hill riots was an innocuous domestic dispute between a Jamaican man and his Swedish wife here outside Latimer Road tube station.
Ray and Madge Britt Morrison's argument duly attracted an audience. Some white men heckled Ray and Madge Britt shouted back at them in defence of her husband. A group of West Indian men joined in. There was a scuffle, and that was the end of the beginning. To begin with, the riot largely consisted of the local mob drunkenly milling about under the railway arches on Bramley Road. As recounted in Jungle West 11, the 58 Riot pulp fact book by Madrid Morrison. The following night, a mob attacked her house on Bard Road, off Freston Road, and a blues party on Bletchenden Street, setting off the late August riot weekend.
Are there coloured people here who do cause trouble themselves?
Well, I never caused none.
But are there any coloured people here you think who give offence in any way?
I don't know. But I never caused none. That's the reason why the district people here love me.
Before Latimer Road was split into Freston Road and the northern stretch by the Westway roundabout, it was as important a thoroughfare as Laverick Grove. Having already appeared in the Blue Lamp and the Lavender Hill mob as a crash site, it was immortalised by Colin McInnes in Absolute Beginners, featuring the altogether less funny Latimer Road mob. Bard Road still exists, although now only as an industrial slip road alongside the West Cross route by the Chrysalis building on Freston Road. Bletchenden Street originally meandered from the north end of Bard Road, round Latimer Road station, across Bramley Road to Lancaster Road. All that remains of it today, after Colin McInnes' planning proposal to pull them down till not a one's left standing up was carried out, is occupied by the Akava Studios, which host the Portobello Film Festival office. The Bletchenden Street Blues incident, as recalled by King Dick in the Windrush book, consisted of Count Suckle playing the Calypso record Oriental Ball, mixed with the bee swarm sound of the Latimer Road mob approaching, shouts of Keep Britain White, breaking glass and police sirens. On this occasion, the police escorted the West Indian partygoers to another club east along Lancaster Road, dissipating the trouble and containing the situation in Notting Hill. However, this gave the mob the impression that they could ethnically cleanse the area. While the moment in pop history was summed up by Colin McInnes from the Manchester Guardian reports, the Kensington News reporter on the scene, Colin Eales, is cited in the Windrush book for capturing the precise flavour of street corner agitation, incredible rumour, sexual hysteria, random violence and holiday anarchy. In the 1959 film Sapphire, racial prejudice is examined during the course of a police investigation into the murder of a light-skinned West Indian girl called Sapphire. The black suspect, Johnny Fiddle, escapes the law from the Tulips Club in Shepherd's Bush, where everyone's called Johnny something, only to run into Notting Hill. After being roughed up by Teds under the Latimer Road arches, he's saved by a grocer woman who locks him in her shop until the police arrive. In the end, Johnny Rotten turns out to be the racist sister of the victim's white boyfriend. The grocer woman's scene was a reenactment of a real riot incident, also incorporated into the Absolute Beginner's book from the Manchester Guardian report.
In Notting Hill Gate, only a mile or two from London's West End, racial violence. An angry crowd of youths chases a Negro into a greengrocer shop, while police reinforcements are called up to check the riot, one of many that have broken out here in a few days. The injured victim, a Jamaican, is taken to safety.
Colin McInnes pictured the woman as the patron saint of corner shops going to heaven by rocket. After Seymour Manning was finally rescued by police on horseback, local teenagers told the Manchester Guardian reporter of reinforcements coming in from Elephant and Castle to help us finish the job, and invited him to come back tomorrow night, mister, for the next instalment.
190,000 coloured people live in Britain, less than half of 1% of the population, and in the main they live happily. A little strange at first, they soon settle into living and working with their new neighbours, working in harmony and peace. Good workers, honest, decent people who have come here because this is the mother country of the Commonwealth. By right, it's their second home. Now their faith in us and the Commonwealth has been shaken by violence. Why did it happen? What must we do? We asked the Reverend Dr. Marcus James, Vicar of Mile End, an all-white parish, and Mr. George Rogers, Member of Parliament for Kensington North.
Mr. Rogers, what do you think are the basic reasons for these riots?
I think they are housing and vice by minority of the immigrants.
Would you agree with that, Dr. James?
I would say that housing is a part of the problem, but the basic problem in the present situation is one, to my mind, of hooliganism, and I personally couldn't hold the view that the coloured minority have any monopoly on vice.
Monday, September the 1st, 1958, day 3 of the riots. The main day of the first Notting Hill Carnival, in the riotous revelry, reckless indulgence in something, e.g. bloodshed, dictionary definition. In the calm before the storm, gangs of white youths loitered about on street corners, and the police presence remained minimal. Once sufficiently encouraged by the fascists at Latimer Road Station, the mob surged out of Notting Dale, up Blenheim Crescent, across Ladbroke Grove, to besiege Rackman's Black Ghetto in Colville, on the way smashing windows of West Indian houses on Westbourne Park Road and Lancaster Road.
If they attack my countrymen, then they have attacked me as well. And if they attack us, then it means that we're going to make certain that we get the last hit. If they do not attack us, they have no fear of us. But if they attack, then we'll fight back.
In the Absolute Beginners film footnote to the book, Gary Beadle as Johnny Wonder portrays Michael de Freitas on his way to becoming Michael X as he organised the black resistance at the Calypso Club on Westbourne Park Road. By all accounts, Michael said, "We don't want committees and representatives. What we need is to get a few bits of iron and a bit of organisation so that when they come in here we can defend ourselves." Echoing the battle without much serious injury in G.K. Chesterton's The Napoleon of Notting Hill, with Michael in the title role, his plan involved turning Toto Bag's Cafe at 9 Blenheim Crescent into a real fortress from which Molotov cocktails were hurled to repel white rioters. The 1958 Battle of Blenheim Crescent was reenacted by Julian Temple in 1985 as a West Side Story style dance sequence on a set at Shepperton Studios, combining the Blenheim Crescent and Bramley Road riot zones. As Temple told the NME at the time, "I don't think they'd let you stage a race riot that easily in Notting Hill these days, and the place itself has all been painted in pretty electric blues or apricot and pink, whereas in the 50s it was all crumbling and blackened slums."
To live together in peace. These little children show the way. It should be easy for all of us, old and young. Singer and teenage idol Marty Wilde knows we can.
I'm appealing to you as a friend and a human being to stop these riots now. A handful of you are disgracing all of us. Remember, black or white, we are all born into the same world.
Well, that's all for this edition. See you again soon.
For the cover picture of the first edition of Absolute Beginners, Roger Main returned to his favourite location, Southam Street in Kensal. This was after a West Indian had been stabbed to death by a gang of white men on the street, and Mosley subsequently held a meeting there. In response to the riots, Claudia Jones organised a Caribbean Carnival show at St Pancras Town Hall in early 1959, which became an annual event in the early 60s. As Mosley was blamed for bringing further disgrace on the area, over 1,000 black and white people followed Kelso Cochrane's funeral cortege in a proto-carnival procession along Ladbroke Grove to Kensal Green Cemetery. Southam Street was declared unfit for human inhabitation in 1963 and demolished in the late 60s to make way for the Edenham estate, including Trellick Tower. All that remains of the street today is the corner pub, the Earl of Warwick, at 36 Golborne Road, which retained a dangerous local atmosphere until its 21st century bar-restaurant conversion into the Golborne Grove. The 58 Notting Hill riots and slum housing conditions also brought about local community action campaigns by everyone from the Methodists to the Angry Brigade. In 1966, Ronnie Laslett and the London Free School Group organised the Notting Hill Fair and Pageant, featuring the first carnival procession. The event remained largely a hippie festival until 1973, when Leslie Palmer established the modern all-Caribbean carnival, with reggae sound systems adding a unique post-colonial twist to traditional calypsonian carnivals of the Eastern Caribbean, helping to foster a then nascent Black British identity.
It's ironic that in the aftermath of the 58 riots, the death of one man, Kelso Cochrane, lost in time, became the spark for the biggest celebration of Afro-Caribbean survival in Europe.